Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Midnight Special. This isn't like a regular kind of sci-fi movie. It's a sci-fi film mixed with an art film. It feels like a sci-fi film made 20 to 30 years ago. It almost feels like a film that was made pre-Spielberg, but with a post-Spielberg plot. It's very interesting and weird and can definitely turn a lot of mainstream audiences off, but if you get what it's doing, can be a really unique sci-fi movie experience. I think the thing about sci-fi movies is we often have people who are just obsessed with sci-fi movies, which is cool, but the problem with that is you're not doing anything new with the medium. They're not doing what they used to do with the medium as science fiction has become more about spectacle and big budget stuff. Midnight Special remembers a time when you could make these weird sci-fi kind of art movies. And it's incredibly dry and slow in some places, but then really comes alive in others. I mean, this film is so dry, I needed lotion afterwards. It almost like made me a little sleepy, and honestly, I can understand why I could tell audience members were getting bored. But then when some big sci-fi thing would happen, the whole audience like stood up with attention. It's not like Spielberg in that it wants to show you the wonder. You're having the wonder. It feels so ordinary and everyday, and then when something fantastic happens, you're like, holy shit, what the fuck? I am awake. I am into this. Okay. Oh, you're boring again. I find it an interesting way to go about science fiction, but I can almost understand why mainstream audiences who really aren't as used to kind of the parallax view, man who fell to earth kind of science fiction films would probably consider this more of a turn off than a turn on. I think this kind of invokes the famous Ebert quote that I use all the time, which is that a film isn't what it is about, it's how it is about it. And how this is about it is a lot more interesting and thought-provoking and uniquely auteur-driven than a lot of sci-fi films I see today. Roy and Lucas, who are on the run with Roy's son Alton, who they have taken him from a cult that they've been living with for a long time on the compound because they're aware the FBI is probably going to come after their son who has special powers and has been informing this cult for some time and almost helping write the sermons, and the FBI is interested in him because various information this kid knows and the possible powers he has, but Roy doesn't want that to happen and hopefully get him to a certain location that Alton's been talking about all this time. The director of this film, Jeff Nichols, is kind of known for slower, drier films. In fact, I often admittedly have a hard time staying awake through his movies. This one, I did not fall asleep during. I got close. But I think what he did, and when I said earlier in the review, he combined a post-Spielberg, almost Amblin kind of idea, like an E.T. Close Encounters idea, and did it in a pre-Spielberg way. This reminds me of 70s films that are very influenced by Bergman, Fellini, the foreign masters, being more slower and more drawn out. Most filmmakers now are influenced by Spielberg and a lot of what happened in the late 70s, but those mid-70s influences didn't really transcend as much. What Jeff Nichols is doing is kind of showing Spielberg in a different light. Spielberg was always about the everyman, the everyday kind of a thing, but he almost puts it to such an extreme. He takes out all the bombast of Spielberg, which, you know, I kind of like and think is fun, but clearly Jeff Nichols doesn't, or at least wants to do it in a different kind of more unique way. It kind of calls to mind that no one really does as much with the Spielberg influence. They kind of just do it. This is an interesting kind of postmodern way to look at a director who is known for his postmodern attempts on sci-fi and drive-in ideas. An interesting idea to kind of take the 70s director-driven kind of ideas and mix them with the thing that very much took down the 70s directors in the end and introduce more of corporate Hollywood. Midnight Special is a sci-fi film that shows the possibilities of what you could do with sci-fi. I think science fiction is too wrapped up into big event movies, big expensive films. Although this is Jeff Nichols' kind of studio movie, it only costs $18 million and it's very much not a studio movie. In fact, later I was like, you sure you didn't, like, they didn't buy it later or something? No, he didn't. This was his studio movie. And it doesn't feel that way at all, which says a lot about Jeff Nichols as a director, but also that when you make a small budgeted movie, they kind of don't care as much, so it's fine. I like how he attempts a film like this because it's not having this cutesy kid played by Jaden Lieberher, I think, who I had previously seen in St. Vincent, and that he was like the cutesy, annoying kid, but how Jeff Nichols plays him kind of shows a lot about the movie and the plot itself. What he's doing with that plot is he's almost looking at it in a more matter-of-fact way. And also the idea that this kid with special powers would influence a cult goes into all the creepy southern fringe religious elements. We always think of the superhero or sci-fi elements of the right people will get their hands on them, and this almost feels like the weird, not that they're wrong to the kid, I don't think anything bad was necessarily going on, that stranger, weirder people have access to this kid, and what they used his powers for is rather interesting, and I think it shows more of an ordinariness to that whole idea rather than doing this quirky or playing it up for the audience. This film almost just like lays it out very flatly, so flatly. I mean, it is a very, very dry movie. Jeff Nichols is very good at that, but the way he plays that dryness to emphasize those action sequences is quite amazing. I haven't seen a director use flow in such an interesting way as he did in Midnight Special. There's a lot to be said at making those big action sequences pop, and damn does he do that. I thought the action sequences fit the movie rather well. I don't think they were that stupendous on their own, but the way they pop out during the movie is quite an incredible experience. I haven't seen that before. In most movies and other movies and more Hollywood movies, you're almost expecting them, but Midnight Special, like, holy shit, I did not see that coming. It really catches you by surprise. So it's like that wonder isn't almost necessary to be overplaying it, and it's interesting to see someone underplay it the way Jeff Nichols does. As much as he does, he really underplays it, so it just feels so ordinary. You're like, oh, they're just at the gas station, this will be fine, and you don't really think about it, and that was really surprising and fun, frankly. It's kind of almost like a fun art movie that's really trying to play down the fun as much as possible, which is something Spielberg, again, isn't that good at, but that's not Spielberg's style. Jeff Nichols is almost like what a different kind of 70s director would have done with a Spielberg movie, is almost kind of the idea of this whole thing. I like particularly Michael Shannon in this film. This isn't a very Michael Shannon kind of role, really. He's usually playing someone a lot crazier. Him playing an everyday kind of dad role was really quite interesting, and I quite liked him, and it shows more of a range from him as an actor. I know he's pretty much a Jeff Nichols favorite, but him as the dad isn't the role you'd expect him in, and I'd actually like to see him play more dad roles, less, creepy weirdos, although he does certainly have the face for that. And Joel Egerton and Kirsten Dunst, everyone's very good, even Sam Shepard. They re-emphasize the very serious, ordinary tone. But Adam Driver, I think this is the film that I really started to think, man, Adam Driver is a movie star, and I liked him quite a bit in Force Awakens, but in Midnight Special, he kind of plays it a lot lighter. He plays it in a different way, and it emphasizes how different he is from everyone else, how he's this FBI specialist. He's really one of the standouts, as well as the kid who plays Alton. It really made me think differently about him as an actor and how well he can move within these films and know exactly how to play it and play it against everyone else. He's almost playing it a lot lighter. He's almost the only character in this film that Spielberg had done this, or this has been done Spielberg produced in an Amblin way. He's probably the only actor I could see being in both movies and working perfectly in both of those movies, and that says a lot. A lot of actors can't do that as well. As I'm talking about how this is very much a 70s movie, if you're talking about the early 70s, and I think what this film does, and it harkens back to a lot of what John Carpenter did, and what everyone says about John Carpenter, or what John Carpenter says about himself, to be honest, but I've said it and a lot of people have said it as well, is John Carpenter is basically making a Western every time, particularly Attack on Precinct 13 and Escape from New York and Vampires and so many others. But Midnight Special almost feels like a Western in a lot of ways. It feels very Western influenced, and that's something we do not see in modern day Hollywood films. They're not as Western influenced. Two guys in guns traveling incognito and making sure the law doesn't find them very much feels like a Western to me. I've heard them say Starman was an influence and things like that. I can kind of see that, but I can really see how Carpenter structured his films, not so much in the dialogue, or definitely the score. Actually, I can see the Carpenter in the score. It feels in that way, the matter-of-factness, that almost trying to be realistic about these uneducated guys who have nothing to say, trying to get precious cargo to another location, going from town to town, from western town to western town, and this taking place in more of middle America, kind of all infused within that. And I think Jeff Nichols could actually give us a really good Western. He probably has done Western influenced things, but I think this shows how sci-fi and Western were a lot closer, even, well, Star Wars, they definitely are, but pre-Star Wars, a lot more people used it, and as we've gotten more and more further away from it, Jeff Nichols kind of brings us back to where sci-fi was right before Star Wars and Spielberg came in, but also showing how those plots could be used within that. It's almost like not critiquing the style, it's like showing a different way to do the style, although everyone else is doing that style almost the same way, like the Amblin style, or like Super 8 or some crap like that. This is probably the more interesting way to use the Spielberg plot, or the kind of 70s postmodern early blockbuster plot, than anyone's really done in a long time. I understand if people are turned off by this, and people who normally like science fiction this might be a little too art movie for you, and I think this might be a little mainstream for most art movie people, but I still found it a really interesting, intriguing film, and every time I really start to think about it, I really start to think about everything it exactly was doing wasn't something I think a lot of science fiction films are really interested in doing. It's interested in doing it in a different way, and speaking almost both about that style, really show you don't have to just do indie dramas like this. You can do all sorts of films like this, and Jeff Nichols, I think, really approaches that in a great way, and it's probably the film of his I like the most at this point, or it's at least the film of his that I was most interested in. His dry style is almost like as much of a turnoff as it is distinctive for him, but I kind of got over that when I started to think about everything he was doing and all the styles and all the various postmodern ideas that go throughout Midnight Special. It really made a real enriching science fiction experience that wasn't about events. It wasn't about just the wonder for wonder's sake. It wasn't about all the things that I've come to be used to. It reminded me of 70s art sci-fi like Man Who Fell to Earth. It reminded me of things that I haven't seen from science fiction in a long time, and almost reminded me of why I miss them and how maybe we could even do them again. I don't know if anyone really could. I think Jeff Nichols is kind of on his own with this one, but it's at least an interesting enough of a sci-fi tangent to question why we have sci-fi films the way they are now and what we're missing by not having them the way they used to be. So if you have seen Midnight Special and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.